Hey, if you have your scriptures, I invite you to find in the New Testament, Gospel of Matthew, chapter 20. I don't know when things are still things and when they're not things anymore. You know what I mean? Probably not. You know, the current deal is, to ask, is this a thing or not? And so one of the things that I realized is that I don't know when a thing is still a thing or not. So, like, back in the day, channel surfing was a thing. But I don't know if people still channel surf, do they? I think now everything is just kind of like, oh, she does, huh? Uh-huh. I don't know if like you just enter in your code now and it comes up or not, but I remember, do you all remember back that was the thing, to talk about channel surfing with your remote control? Anyone know what I'm talking about here? And so there was a time where that was a thing, but I don't know if it's still a thing anymore. But I do remember, I've never been a TV, not for a long time, I haven't been a TV guy. But I remember, it's been back some time, I was just kind of surfing through the channels because I guess I didn't have anything else going on. I was just sitting around. I thought I would just watch some TV. And I landed, so number one, it's not very common for me to watch TV, but then I landed on PBS, which is even less common for me to watch as far as TV. That's just me, okay? And I landed on a musical, which is even less likely for me to land on. So this was like maybe the planets were just lined up right or whatever, but I happened upon this musical on PBS while channel surfing. This was probably back in the 90s. And I got stuck there. Have you ever done that? You just kind of are going through and something's on and you just kind of wind up watching it? Anyone besides me ever do that? I mean, I didn't, and somewhere about, a little bit into it, I kind of got into it a little bit. And it was this musical, and it was called Into the Woods. Has anyone heard of that musical? Thank you, Bryce. Into the Woods. And it was a very, very good musical from what I understand. And I think Disney turned it into a movie that got mixed reviews. Am I right? Okay, good. So, Siskel and Ebert rolled into one. So, Into the Woods was what I found was the musical. It was by Stephen Sondheim. He did the music arrangement, and it was by James Lapine, who wrote the script for it. And it's this very creative, very clever story that draws from some of the classic fairy tales, and they kind of all get jumbled up in the woods. And so you've got Jack and the Beanstalk, and Little Red Riding Hood, and Cinderella, and Rapunzel. And somehow these four kind of wind up getting all jumbled around, and it was very funny and very clever, and then it kind of got more kind of purposefully convoluted, and then it started to get a little bit dark. Am I right, Bryce? Okay. If you're not sure about that, check with Bryce. And I thought this is an interesting deal, that there's these stories that we never really put together, that kind of got thrown together, and what's the word? Obfuscated, confused, jumbled. But I still liked it. It was a good show. But it came to mind for me this week because we've been going through, for probably about a month now, parables. And parables are, if you want to put it that way, Christianity illustrated. And in Matthew 20, what happens is there's a parable that Jesus tells, and I was familiar with the parable. It's about the landowner and the laborers and different ones he hires in, I'm talking about at different times of the day. What I didn't know, what I hadn't put together, is that it's tied in Matthew. Matthew 20, okay, you may want to write this down. Matthew 20 follows Matthew 19. How many know the story of the rich young ruler? Remember that one? Kept the law. What do I need to do? I've kept the rules all my life. Well, I say, what do I need to do? Jesus says, the commands, keep those. And he says, I've done it since it's a kid. And Jesus said, so you lack one thing. Remember what it is? Sell. He doesn't say everything. He just says, sell your possessions. And then he said, you will find. Does that remind you of anything, by the way? Remember when we were looking at the treasure? Remember where it says that there is a person who finds the treasure in the field, and so they sell what they have to get the real treasure? All that's happening there in the story of the rich young ruler is that parable is getting played out in real life in real time. Jesus is saying, this is the treasure. All you have to do is let go of your stuff and you will find it. But the guy doesn't, right? The rich young ruler, what are we told that happens with him? He walks away, sadly. And isn't it interesting? Jesus lets him go. And then Jesus talks about how hard it is for rich people, right, to get to the kingdom. And then the disciples are thinking, well, who can be saved? Because this guy, he was materially blessed, which is usually an indicator of God's favor. And he's morally clean. And if he's not getting in, who can get in? Remember, I don't know if you all remember this. You can check it. It's all in Matthew 19, starting about verse 16 on. So I'm just kind of walking you through. This isn't even the text, okay? We're going to get there. But Jesus talks about, you know what, with humans, with man, it's not possible. But when God does something in you, it is possible. He said, and trust me on this, no one has let go of anything that they won't receive above and beyond what they would ever imagine in the kingdom. Follow me? Now let me ask you this. I had never put those two things together, but Matthew does. Matthew 19 and Matthew 20. He puts the story of the rich young ruler and the disciples trying to figure it out. Oh, there's one more thing. Once Jesus says no one's really left anything behind that they won't regain or won't receive in the kingdom. And did you pick up at the very end of chapter 19 what Peter says? He says, hey, we've left everything to follow you. So Peter's connecting the dots here, right? Jesus just said if we leave stuff, we get the kingdom. And Peter's saying, hey, we're in then. And the goody two-shoes guy that's really rich, that's always been looking down on us, he's out, but we're in. One more parable before I actually get to the real parable for today. You remember the Pharisee who stood on the corner of the street and prayed, and he said, I thank God that I'm not like those sinners over there, publicans and tax collectors. And Jesus didn't have good words for that. But do you see a little bit of what Peter's doing? Peter connected the dots, and then he says, basically, I thank God I'm not like those self-righteous people over there. Anything about that make you a little uncomfortable? It's the same basic dynamic going on. Just different people wearing the black hat and the white hat, but it's the same dynamic going on. Now we're ready. So that's when Jesus tells this parable in Matthew chapter 20. And it appears as though he's telling the parable for the disciples' sake. So these two stories, the rich young ruler and the disciples' response, and now the parable, get brought together. Not to confuse anything, but to make some things really, really clear. Here we go. For the kingdom of heaven is like. Here's your window to understand Christianity. Here's your window to understand the new life that God's inviting us to. It's breaking in, it's penetrating into the kingdom of earth. And here it is. And he says it's like a landowner. You may want to take a look at that landowner. You'd want to put a capital L on that one, because we know that the landowner is representing or is the image of God. Okay? It's like a landowner who went out early in the morning, 6 o'clock, to hire laborers for his vineyard. And when he had agreed with the laborers for a denarius, that's a day's wage for the day, he sent them to the vineyard. Then he went out about the third hour, 9 o'clock, and saw others who are standing without work. Idle gives the wrong idea there, that translation. What it means is these are people that simply don't have work. Not that they're being lazy. But they're in the marketplace. And to those he said, you too, go into the vineyard, and what is right I will pay you. I will give you. So they went. And again he went out about the 6th noon, and the 9th, 3, and did the same thing. And about the 11th hour, you ever wonder where that old expression, the 11th hour, came in at the 11th hour? I always thought it was like, was it like midnight or what? Nope, it's 5 o'clock. It's the end of the workday, okay? He went out and found others standing, and he said to them, why have you been standing here without work all day long? They said, because no one hired us. He said to them, you too, go into the vineyard. That's great. And when evening had come, the owner of the vineyard, the landowner, said to his foreman, call them, pay them their wages, and begin with the last group first. And when those who were hired about the 11th hour, when they received a denarius, that is, the full day's wage, when they came, that's what they received. And when those who were hired first came, they thought they'd receive more. And they received each the day's wage. And when they received it, they grumbled at the landowner, saying, these last men have worked only an hour, and you paid them equal to us, and we've borne the burden and the scorching heat of the day. But the landowner answered and said to them, friend, I'm doing you no wrong. Did you not agree with me for a denarius? Take what is yours, go your way. But I wish to give this last man the same as to you. Is it not lawful for me to do what I wish with what is my own? Or is your eye envious because I am generous? Literally it is your eye evil because I am good? And so the last will be first, and the first last. Let's pray. Speak, Lord. We long to hear from you. Amen. The parable and the story of the rich young ruler. Interesting, isn't it? Put those together. I just want to lift out a few things from this parable that maybe we can have to take with us. It might change a little bit of the way we understand the kingdom of heaven. Let's go. The whole thing starts with a picture, and we don't want to miss the picture. Here's the picture. The picture is of the landowner who goes looking. Remember what we said? Landowner is the image of who? God. This is a picture of grace, right? This is the picture of the God who goes looking. He's a landowner. They could have come to him, right? And often they should have come to him. But this is the story of a landowner who goes looking. This is the story of the God who goes looking. And he doesn't go looking just once, right? The landowner goes looking again and again and again and again. We're told 5 times he goes looking. 5 times he goes looking. He goes looking repeatedly. He doesn't simply stand waiting for someone that might decide that they want. He goes looking for them. He goes looking, if you will, for us. Again and again and again. You think maybe on the first trip there were some folks that didn't take him up on the offer? I do. You know what? He came looking again. And maybe when he came looking again, they took him up on the offer. And maybe there were some those who came looking. When he came looking, they turned him down. They didn't take him up on the offer a second time. But he was there again at noon. And at 3. And at 5. This is the story, and this is the picture of God's grace. The God who comes looking again and again and again and again. And sometimes people, they say, well, hey, I know he's come looking for me, and that's just not something I'm ready to do. You know what? He's coming looking again. He's coming looking again and again and again. And that's the picture here of grace. He also comes, and I don't know if you picked up on it or not, but one of the last times that he comes looking, he asks why they're not at work. And you remember what they said? Because nobody else wanted us. Kind of makes sense, I guess, right? Your good workers will get snapped up early, right? The workers that people want, they get snapped up early. Anyone ever do the elementary school kickball games and you choose up teams, right? Nobody wants to be the last one picked, right? The landowner goes looking and looking and looking and looking, and he also goes looking not only repeatedly, but he goes looking for those that nobody else wanted, that no one else would have picked. And he chooses them. That's grace. That's grace. God seeks those that are left behind. He seeks those that no one else really wanted. That's you. That's me. I have to say something here, though, because it is pretty obvious in the text. And to not say it would be remiss of me. And that is, there is a time and there is a point where he doesn't go looking anymore. And that's a sobering thing. But let's not forget, he goes time and time and time and time again. But there is a point where it is too late. And I would be remiss if I didn't bring that out. This is a parable that's a picture of grace. And the picture of grace is that this is a God who goes looking. And he goes looking for folks again and again. And he looks for those that everybody else passed over. But that's not all. It's also a picture of grace in the sense that this is the God who makes good on his promise. Right? He said, you come, be with me. You will receive your wages for that. And what do we see later on? At the end of the day, what happens? Call them in. He says to the foreman, call them in. We've made promises we will keep. No one is going to leave wronged. No one's going to be left wanting. The promises that he's made, he keeps. And that's the picture. Picture of the landowner. We got that in mind? Got it fixed? That's the first part of the parable. Here's the next part. It goes from a picture of the landowner to a problem. And the problem is a serious one. What you have here as far as the problem is poison. Poison is being ingested. And that poison is called comparison. Did you see it? The poison is called comparison, and it is lethal. Now, there's different forms of comparison, would you agree? But I don't know of a lot of them that are really good. I think they all are kind of toxic, if you really think about it, but there are some that are more lethal than others. There's a kind of comparison where we go around and we give ourselves the short end of the comparison. Anyone ever play that game? We compare our worst to someone else's best, and then it's like, okay, if I didn't have a reason to drag myself around in the dirt, I do now. Because I've just gone down the road of comparison. And by comparison, I give myself the short end, and so therefore I wind up demeaning myself. And usually when I demean myself, then I defeat myself. Ever seen that one play out? Where we compare ourselves, or we see people who compare themselves to others, but they always give themselves the short end because they're comparing their worst to someone else's best. That's one form that comparison takes. Here's another. It goes the other way. We compare so that we make ourselves superior, right? We compare our best to someone else's worst so that therefore we can kind of feel better about ourselves and we can kind of justify looking down our noses at other people and we can kind of tell ourselves, see, I am better. I don't think that that's all that healthy either, do you? Those forms of comparison don't seem to be what's really in play here. There is another form of comparison. And this one, I think, is particularly lethal. It's a comparison of what you have and get to what someone else has and got. And that's what's going on here. Right? That's what's going on in the parable. There's some comparing of this is what I have and got. And I'm now comparing it to what they have and got. This form of comparing feeds bitterness. It feeds resentment. And it's usually fueled by two things, at least two things. It's fueled by what I will call selective forgetfulness. Anyone ever witnessed some selective forgetfulness? Usually we talk about selective memory. It's kind of the same thing. But selective forgetfulness is where we kind of manage to forget some important parts of the picture so that we can be bent and offended about the rest of the picture. What you have here in the parable is, this is what they got paid, that's what they agreed with, and they were happy with that, correct? You bet we'll take that deal. And it was a good deal until what? Until they compared what they had and got with what that other person had and got. Selective forgetfulness. They were very happy. Anyone ever witnessed the spectacle of sports negotiation of salaries and free agents? And you have these athletes that they hold out because they need to be worth blah, blah, blah. And then all the drama plays out. Then they sign and, oh, I'm happy to be here. And we're very satisfied with this deal. Until when? The next year, when another free agent signs a different contract. And then all of a sudden, well, I can't live on this. It's only $17 million a year. I told someone once, I said, some of these guys, they make more in a year than I make in a week. No, really. They do. Selective forgetfulness. We forget how happy we were. And then we look and see what we think someone else got. Here's the second thing. And that is a skewed idea of fairness. Fair according to who? Well, it's not fair. They got this and I didn't. Fair according to who? See, sometimes we run these dueling levels of what we think is fair. Anyone familiar with the book of Jonah? Anyone familiar with the story of Jonah? Okay. Anyone say Jonah? There's an interesting dynamic that happens in the book of Jonah. And here it is. When Jonah's in the fish's belly, he is all about the mercy of God. He is praying for God's mercy to him. He is all about it, and that sure seems fair to him. But you know what? When he goes to Nineveh, and he's hoping to see them blown away, but instead they turn to God, and God relents, we're told, and forgives them. You remember what Jonah does? He goes up on the side of the hill to see and watch God destroy them, and when God doesn't destroy them, he gets bent at God. And he even says, this is why I ran off in the first place. Because it'd be just about like you to forgive these people. Read it. That's the whole point. And you know what it is? It's an argument of Jonah with God about fairness. But what's ironic in that is it's a pretty skewed idea of fairness and the idea of who should get mercy and who should not. Because Jonah was all about mercy when he's in the fish's belly, but he's not so about mercy when it's going to somebody else. That's a problem. Agreed? I'm out of time and I've got a whole lot more to say. Comparison leads to complaint in this story. Did you see it? When they saw what they got, and then they compared with what they perceived that they had, forget that they had the opportunity to not be in the marketplace waiting for work, that they had a job, that they had a good wage, that they had a good environment, that they were meaningfully engaged in what they were doing. Forget about all that. They see this, they compare it to that, they get resentful. That's what it says. And it says that they grumbled at the landowner. Not about him. I'm not endorsing that, but they weren't talking just about it. That's just reaction, They weren't grumbling to him. They weren't saying, is there something we can do or we can talk about here? No. They were grumbling at him. There isn't reasoning with this. They were grumbling at him. And I thought about that. And I thought, really? Really? You're going to engage an argument with God about what you think you're entitled to? Really? Tim, Romans 8, who didn't withhold his son but gave him freely for you, and you're going to engage and grumble at God about whether he's fair or not? About whether he's given you what you're entitled to or not? The whole point that he didn't withhold his son is saying you are entitled to hell. And you're going to argue with him about what's fair? If you really want what you're entitled to, that's what you should get. Really? We're going to grumble at God about his goodness to the one who didn't withhold his son so that he could reclaim my life and your life from the pit. And we're going to go up to God and demand that he be fair? It's a problem. This is poison. And it will devastate your soul. And Jesus is telling this parable to tell the 12, don't let this happen to you. When you move away from focusing on the grace that God has poured to you, then it is very easy to start comparing. And when you start comparing, it's very easy to start complaining. And when we start complaining and grumbling at God, really? Since I'm already over, I'm just going to go ahead and finish. Is that okay? You know what? I was delayed because everyone was running out to check their car. You owe me 3 minutes. Okay. I've cashed that in a few times, haven't I? The parable ends with the landowner giving his perspective. And it's really interesting, this perspective that he gives. It is gracious. He starts it out, and you may want to check this. I think it's about verse 13 maybe, 14 in there. He starts it out and he simply says, friend. Now this isn't going to be, he engages the person grumbling. This isn't going to be kind of one of those commending kind of exchanges. He's not going to commend the guy. The guy and the group that he's speaking for, they have been ingesting some real poison. He's not going to say, good job, you guys. This, and the expression itself is not one that's kind of the, how shall we say, the warm and fuzzy. But it is of patience. It is an expression of patience that says, I need to correct something here with you. It's like the fella, Mennonite. Mennonite are pacifist. They would do no harm. But there was a Mennonite fella, who heard something in his home, heard something rattling around, and there apparently was someone who had broken into their home. So he goes and he gets his hunting gun, and he goes down and he happens upon the intruder. And he explains to the intruder, and he said, friend, I would not harm thee, but you're standing where I'm about to shoot. Well, this is a little bit like that, friend. And then he explains, you weren't treated wrong at all. Every promise made to you was kept. You have not been left wanting or left in the wrong. But what is mine? I have the freedom to decide what I will do with it. That's the argument. And then he says, and it's really an encouragement. He said, don't allow my goodness to somehow become evil in you. Meaning, don't look at my generosity towards someone else and have that become jealousy for you instead of joy for them. You get it? The same one who's been generous to you, and you've enjoyed that. Then when I am generous to someone else, don't allow that to turn to jealousy for you instead of joy. What's wrong with your heart if you look at my generosity towards someone else and instead of taking joy for them in that, you are jealous of them for that? Don't let that happen to you. Isn't this a fascinating parable? It peels away some things. And it teaches us something about the kingdom. And here's what it teaches us. The kingdom of heaven is about grace, not merit. And the grace that we want to celebrate when it comes to us, we also need to celebrate when it comes to someone else. Right? And Jesus is speaking this to the 12 as a caution to them. They are on the ground floor. So do not receive the grace of God. Listen, do not receive the grace of God, or at least attempt to receive the grace of God in a way that does not make you gracious when that grace comes to someone else. They are the first in. There are going to be a whole lot of folks that follow the 12 into the kingdom. They need to get this right. They need to be celebrating that the same grace and the same generosity given to God will be given to those who follow them. They cannot, having been judged themselves by the world around them, they can't then turn around and start being judges to those who follow them in. That's the parable. That's Christianity illustrated. That's the kingdom.